Well, you may or may not know it, but there are a large variety of symbols that are associated with our Christian faith. We all know about the cross, but there are other symbols: the dove, the lamb, and the fish. And regarding the fish, one person writes that the Greek word for fish is ichthys. And long ago, early Christians turned this Greek word into an acrostic, which is when letters are taken in order to form a word or a phrase. And so from the Greek word for fish, ichthys, people came up with an acrostic that in English means Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. Now, another person writes, according to one ancient story, and who knows whether or not this is true, but long ago, when a Christian met a stranger in the road, the Christian sometimes drew one arc of the simple fish outline in the dirt. And if the stranger drew the other arc, both believers knew they were in good company because the fish was produced as shown on this slide. But aside from the fish and other creatures mentioned, and a lot of other creatures, the rooster has long been associated with Christianity. In fact, if you travel to Europe, you can go and find ancient churches on top of very old steeples. You will find roosters. Remember, on the night before Jesus died, Jesus said to Peter, "Before the rooster crows, you will have denied me 3 times." And as we know, that's exactly what happened. So the rooster, in part, symbolizes for us our need for forgiveness and that sometimes we get it wrong. But there's more that the rooster represents. As the rooster crows, as the sun comes up, the rooster reflects morning and new beginnings and new opportunities for us to change and grow. But the rooster also represents the sunrise on Easter morning. So the rooster reminds us of Jesus' resurrection. And while there are other associations, roosters have been a symbol of our tradition for a long time. So next time you see a rooster, give thanks to that rooster. For some reason, when I was looking up some of the history of roosters, and I'd remembered some of it I'd forgot, for some reason all these stupid jokes came popping up on my screen. I said, I don't want jokes, I want to find out what roosters have to do with Christianity. So I wrote down Christianity, roosters, and then up popped, is chicken soup good for your health? Not if you're a chicken. And then I said, ancient role of rooster in Christianity. And up popped, why did the chicken disappoint his mother? Because he was not all he cracked up to be. And then I kept going. I said, no, please. I said, Jesus and the rooster. And up popped, why was the chicken ejected from the game? Because of all the foul play. And I had to get up and go for a walk around the building. I didn't find any of those things to be good jokes. That was stupid. Now, this morning I want to move. By the way, I'll be back to roosters later. But this morning I'd like to spend a few moments delving into the topic of mercy. It's a big one and certainly central to our walk with Jesus. And to help us get started, let's first look at what mercy actually means, and then take a brief look at some stories about mercy in Scripture. Well, the word mercy in Latin comes from a word which means price paid, debt forgiven. Dictionaries define mercy as compassion or forgiveness towards someone whom is within one's power to punish or harm. Mercy conveys forbearance or patient self-control and restraint and tolerance. Mercy is all about kindness. And what's very interesting is from a variety of sources in biblical Hebrew, the word mercy comes from a root word that, quote, denotes the same kind of divine protection that a baby has in its mother's womb. What an interesting, fascinating definition of where the word mercy comes from. So mercy is about a protective proclivity. In biblical Greek, mercy means compassion and being tender-hearted. And also in Greek, the word mercy relates to the word that is related to the root word that refers to the inner organs of our body. Hence, from the ancient Greek, we now have phrases as, "My heart goes out to you," or "That was gut-wrenching." Well, one thing is crystal clear. God is a God of mercy. Mercy is central to who God is, and mercy is shown in story after story after story in both the Old and the New Testaments. Let's look at just a few. Take the story of Adam and Eve from the book of Genesis. You know the story as well. Adam and Eve were in paradise, and in that place there was the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God said, "You can eat anything except the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." And as we know, that's the one thing Adam and Eve chose to do. They ate from the fruit of that tree. And so God kicked them out of the Garden of Eden. But when God did so, we're told in Genesis that God clothed Adam and Eve. That was an act of mercy on God's part. Then there's the story of Cain and Abel. They were brothers. Abel was focused. Cain was an egotistical, jealous hothead. And as a result, one day, when the brothers are out and about, Cain kills Abel. God, as an expression of justice, drives Cain from his homeland. And Cain tells God that being away from home will make him vulnerable and that people will kill him. And so in an act of mercy, God places a mark on Cain so that no one would harm him. Many of you recall the story of Jonah, the fellow who did the opposite of what God asked him to do. In fact, Jonah tried to flee from God and went 180 degrees away from the place that God asked him to travel. Jonah heads out to sea on a ship, and while out to sea, a massive storm arises. Jonah is tossed out into the sea, but God has mercy on him and saves him through the actions of a giant fish. That was an act of mercy. When Jonah arrives finally at a town called Nineveh, Jonah says to the people exactly what God had asked him to say. And in response, the people of Nineveh repent and turn back to God. And God spares the people of Nineveh in an act of mercy. Jonah was not happy about God's mercy, so he sat down in a spot outside of the city in the hot sun and he pouted. And God provided a vine and made it grow over Jonah's head to give him shade. This was an act of mercy, even though Jonah was recalcitrant. Then there was Jesus, the master of mercy. A fellow is filled with demons. Jesus heals the man. A great crowd gathered, and Jesus provided them all with food. A blind man begs Jesus to be healed. Jesus brings a widow's son back to life, as well as his friend Lazarus. All of these are acts of mercy. Jesus spoke about mercy, taught about mercy, encouraged his followers to be merciful, and warned people, particularly religious people, that not being merciful is the antithesis of what God seeks from us. Jesus one day said he's not interested in sacrifices, but in people demonstrating their love of God through being merciful. Jesus said, "I desire not sacrifice, but mercy." Even Jesus' mother Mary spoke of mercy. So did Paul. So did James. And on and on and on and on throughout Scripture we learn that God is mercy. It's fundamental to who God is, and we are called to view God, others, and ourselves through this lens of mercy. More on that in a moment. Let's take a brief look at our reading today. Abraham and his wife Sarah had been on the road. They had been called by God to leave home, to lead the beginning of a brand new movement in which God's people would eventually live in the promised land. And as Abraham and Sarah are on the move, one day they are on the outskirts of two cities named Sodom and Gomorrah. And it was in these two cities that people were acting in unbelievable, terrible ways. Greed, theft, lying, treating poor people terribly, sexual assault of both males and females, violence, amoral chaos. The name of the normative game in these two cities was cruelty. And what's amazing is that it seemed that everyone seemed in on it. In our reading today, Abraham engages God with some questions that have to do with both mercy and justice. Abraham holds nothing back and in some ways challenges God. But in some ways, God is challenging Abraham to teach him about justice and mercy. Well, God shares with Abraham the terrible things are happening in Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham then says, in essence, God, I know there have to be consequences for terrible actions, but what if there are 50 good people in these cities? Will you still destroy them? God responded, if there are 50 good people, I will spare everyone. Abraham then asked God, but what if there are less than 50? What if there are only 40? What if there are only 30? What if there are only 20? What if there are only 10? And in response to each of these questions, God tells Abraham he will spare the cities if indeed good and righteous people can be found. This story and what follows in the next chapter of Genesis certainly is a story about justice, that not anything goes, that there are consequences from actions, that people who are bad actors impact everyone around them, that life cannot be a free-for-all, that God will not let cruelty remain unanswered. But this part of the story in chapter 18 also reflects God's desire to be merciful and compassionate. God seeks to be merciful. God is merciful. And God wants us to respond to his merciful nature by changing and becoming more merciful ourselves. Now, all of what we've touched on thus far points us and encourages us and invites us to ponder and act upon three basic ideas in our lives that have to do with mercy. First, to take it in and to remember that God is merciful. Mercy is who God is. Secondly, we need to be merciful toward others. More on that in a second. And finally, we need to demonstrate mercy toward ourselves. And the fact that God is merciful is the driver of our need to be merciful towards others and for ourselves. And given that we have touched on God's mercy, let us look at the idea of being merciful toward others. Some of you may know the story in chapter 18 of Matthew's Gospel. Jesus tells a story about a fellow who owed a king a lot of money. The man could not pay the debt, and so the king ordered that the man and his family be sold to pay off the debt. The man begs the king for mercy, and the king relents, and he cancels the entire debt that the man owed him. Well, later, that same man whose debt had been canceled by the king had a servant of his own who owed him some money. And the man grabbed his servant and began to choke and threaten him. And the servant begged for mercy, but the man refused to relent. Well, the king heard about this event, so he calls the man back whose debt he had forgiven. And he says, "You wicked fellow, I canceled your debt because you begged me to. Should you not have shown the same mercy on the person who owed you?" And Jesus, in telling this story, uses it to teach us all that we are called to be merciful toward others because we have each received mercy from God. On this point of being merciful toward others, Rick Warren writes that being merciful toward others means being patient with people's quirks, helping people who are hurting, giving people a second chance, a third chance, a fourth chance, doing good to those who hurt us, being kind to those who offend us, building bridges of love with others, and putting relationships ahead of rules. Another person writes that to be merciful to others includes walking alongside people when they are suffering, to be patient when we are wronged by someone else, to pray for others, and to struggle along on the journey of forgiveness. So our reading in God's merciful nature compels each of us to ask ourselves, where am I really with having a merciful heart? Where am I in living my day-to-day life and expressing mercy toward others each day? How merciful is my heart toward others? Does my heart's mercy reflect God's mercy for me? But I believe we're also invited to explore how we're doing with being merciful toward ourselves. And to help us explore being merciful towards ourselves, let's get back to roosters. On this point of mercy towards self, I love what Jen Wilkin writes. She states with some adaptations, our senses are very powerful memory holders. The smell of mothballs transports me to my grandparents' attic. The taste of pound cake transports me to my mother's kitchen. A screen door slamming sends me back to childhood. Imagine what kind of memory the rooster's crow evoked for Peter. Every dawn, after that morning of betrayal, the sound of a rooster would bring back his colossal failure of denying Jesus. And there was evening, and there was morning, cockle-doodle-doo, guilt for breakfast for Peter once again. For a moment, I invite you to think about what some of your memory holders are based on your five senses. For example, when you see a certain tree or sky or sign or a map or clouds or any other kind of thing, what do you see? Does what you see ever bring back a memory you were struggling with being merciful toward yourself over? When you hear a piece of music or the call of a particular bird, when you touch a certain fabric or feel a raindrop on your skin, when you smell a particular smell coming from the kitchen or cologne or perfume, when you taste something sweet or spicy or a combination of things, what are some of your memory holders? Well, I know our sense memory holders can bring us a smile, a sense of delight, or a feeling of grateful nostalgia. I also know that some memory holders for many of us can bring back something for which we need to extend ourselves: mercy. For Peter, it was the cockle-doodle-doo sound of a rooster in the morning. What is or are some of your own roosters, so to speak? Wherever you are on the journey of extending yourself mercy, remember that God already has. For God's response to you and to me is one not only of love, but bountiful, releasing, healing mercy. So let's continue the journey of becoming merciful toward ourselves. Now, as I wrap, you all may know these words that date back probably to the 2nd century, if not earlier. The words Kyrie eleison, Christi eleison, Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy. In a moment, we're going to hear these words sung, words that have been sung and chanted again since the 2nd century. And as you listen, or even join in, reflect upon God's mercy. Think about where you are with being merciful toward others, about having a merciful heart. And as we hear these words, I invite you in your mind to go to those places where God is asking you to have the same mercy toward yourself that God already does.